Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the mechanics of learning. We're going to explore exactly how we evaluate progress, and we're going to do it by unpacking a brilliant culinary metaphor. Seriously, this simple idea might just fundamentally change how you view absolutely every test, quiz, or evaluation you ever encounter from here on out.
All right, part one, tastes like formative assessment.
So we're going to anchor this whole concept on a famous and honestly surprisingly profound joke by the assessment researcher Robert Stake. He said, "When the cook tastes the soup, that's formative. When the guests taste it, that's summative." Now, it's a quick joke, right? But it carries a massive idea. Because if you think about it, the exact same spoonful of soup gives you totally different information depending entirely on when you taste it. And, crucially, what you can still do about it. This brilliantly hits the nail on the head regarding the core difference here. See, when the cook tastes the soup, it's formative because the recipe can still be changed. They can throw in a pinch of salt, maybe let it simmer a bit longer. But when the guest tastes the soup, well, it's summative. The meal is served, the verdict is delivered, it's a final, backwards-looking judgment.
Okay, moving into part two, a quiet testing revolution.
It's actually kind of fascinating how these terms evolved and sparked this quiet revolution in education. Starting way back in 1967, Michael Scriven coined formative and summative, but strictly for curriculum design, not for the students. Then, shortly after, Benjamin Bloom took that distinction and pointed it directly at the learners themselves. Suddenly, assessment wasn't just this final, scary verdict. And by 1998, a landmark study by Black and William finally gave this entire revolution its empirical backbone.
The whole thing hinges on a massive shift in perspective. Summative assessment looks backward. It literally sums up. Think final exams or final grades that measure your achievement at one fixed point in time. Formative assessment, on the other hand, looks forward. Its entire purpose isn't to rank anyone, but to inform. It reveals exactly where a learner is right now, so both the teacher and the learner can figure out, okay, what do we do next?
Listen, if you take literally only one thing away today, make it this. The defining feature that separates formative from summative is not the format of the test. Not at all. It is how you use the information. A quick Friday quiz is summative if you just jot down the grade and move on. But that exact same quiz becomes formative if you look at the results and say, wow, okay, half the class missed this concept. I need to totally change tomorrow's lesson plan. That specific nuance. That's exactly why researchers love using these three very particular sharp phrases. Pay attention to the shifting prepositions here. Assessment of learning, that's our summative look back. Assessment for learning, that's our formative approach. And then beautifully, there's assessment as learning, which happens when the students themselves use the evidence to steer their own progress. These labels matter so much because they completely shift the spotlight from merely measuring someone to actively developing them.
Which brings us to part three, inside the black box.
Now, I know this all sounds fantastic in theory, right? But does it actually work? Well, to find out, we have to look to researchers Paul Black and Dylan William. Back in 1998, they wanted to know what actually raises educational standards in the real world. So they published a landmark review titled Inside the Black Box, where they synthesized roughly 250 different studies on the subject. And the numbers they found were absolutely staggering. They discovered that strengthening formative assessment, that daily minute-by-minute conversation between teaching and learning, produced some of the largest learning gains in all of the research literature. We're talking effect sizes commonly hitting between 0.4 and 0.7. Now, if you aren't a statistician, that decimal might look a little small.
But to put that into perspective, in educational research, an effect size of 0.4 to 0.7 represents the literal difference between a strictly average student and a clearly above average one. Black and William proved that this was a more powerful lever for raising standards than almost any major structural reform, and crucially, it was one of the very few strategies that actually narrowed achievement gaps.
Moving to our final section, part 4, the cook and the guest. Now, after seeing data like that, you might be thinking, let's just throw out final exams entirely. But hold on. Formative and summative are not enemies. They aren't even different species of tests. They are simply two uses of evidence. And a well-designed system absolutely requires both. We need the cook to feed the learning process along the way. But eventually, we need the guests to taste the soup for accountability, professional certification, and fair reporting. But here's the problem. The balance right now is completely broken. The tragedy in modern classrooms, and really in a lot of corporate learning environments too, is that almost all the tasting happens at the table. If the cook never tastes along the way, the outcome of the meal is completely decided before anyone even pulls up a chair. We wait until the final exam or the big yearly review to do all our tasting, and by then, well, it's far too late to add salt.
The practical takeaway here is simple, but it is an absolute game changer. If we want to serve better soup, we just have to commit to tasting early and tasting often. We have to shift our entire mindset from constantly judging learning to actively feeding it while it's actually happening. So before you hand out or take another end-of-term test, or before you design your next project evaluation, I want to leave you with this single, transformative question to ask yourself. What evidence are you gathering while there is still time to act on it? Seriously, think about that for your own environment. Are you just waiting around to be the guest, or are you stepping into the kitchen to be the cook?